The sky above Nexus Prime burned orange and red as another wave of Raktar ships screamed through the atmosphere. Commander Zeloth pressed her scaled hand against the cold metal of the observation deck window, watching the latest bombardment tear through what remained of the outer city. Each explosion sent tremors through the command bunker buried deep beneath the capital. "Ma'am, we've lost contact with Sector 7, reported Lieutenant Crix, his crystalline body flickering with stress patterns. The young Vorthak officer's voice carried the same exhaustion that weighed on everyone in the bunker. They had been fighting for 3 months without rest. Zeloth turned from the window, her reptilian features grim. The Catherian Defense Coalition had seemed so strong just a year ago. Dozens of species working together, sharing technology and knowledge. The avian skyreachers with their incredible flight abilities. The crystal-bodied Vorthak who could store and redirect energy like living batteries. The amphibious tidal folk who could fight underwater and on land with equal skill. Even her own people, the Catherians, brought their natural tactical minds and leadership skills to the Alliance. But none of it mattered against the Vraktar. "Show me the tactical display," she ordered. Moving to the central hologram projector, the three-dimensional map of Nexus Prime appeared, covered in angry red markers showing enemy positions. The blue markers representing coalition forces had shrunk to a tiny cluster around the capital city. "They've broken through the eastern defenses," reported Captain Thalo, her webbed fingers dancing over the control panel. The tidal folk officer's usually calm demeanor showed cracks of desperation. The 42nd Wing tried to hold them at the river, but the Vraktar just walked through the water like it wasn't there. Zeloth studied the display with growing horror. In just the past 6 hours, they had lost more ground than in the previous week. The Vraktar swarm moved like a living thing, flowing around obstacles and overwhelming defensive positions with pure numbers. Each individual Vraktar looked like a giant insect, standing 8 feet tall with razor-sharp claws and armor plating that seemed to adapt to whatever weapons were fired at it. "What about the heavy artillery positions on Hill 847? She asked, though she already feared the answer. "Overrun an hour ago," Crix replied, his crystal body dimming further. "The gun crews held as long as they could, but there were just too many." The Vraktar came from every direction at once. The command bunker fell silent except for the constant rumble of explosions overhead. Zeloth looked around at her remaining staff. They had started this war with over 200 officers from dozens of species. Now barely 30 remained, their faces showing the strain of endless fighting against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. "Ma'am?" interrupted Communications Officer Vilex, his forearms working frantically over his console. "We're getting reports from the other coalition worlds. Korthak Prime has gone silent. The defense fleet at Trilak Station was destroyed completely. And the mining colonies in the Outer Rim?" He paused, his voice breaking. "There are no survivors." Zeloth closed her eyes. 17 worlds. The Vraktar had consumed 17 entire worlds in less than 2 years. Not conquered, consumed. They stripped each planet of every living thing and all useful resources before moving on to the next target. No one knew where they came from or what they ultimately wanted. They just appeared at the edge of known space and began their relentless advance. "Have we heard anything from the evacuation ships?" she asked quietly. "The last transport convoy left the system 6 hours ago," Thalo reported. "They managed to save about 40,000 civilians. The rest?" She didn't finish the sentence. 40,000 out of a population of 8 million. Zeloth felt the weight of failure crushing down on her shoulders. She had been chosen to command the coalition forces because of her species' reputation for tactical brilliance. The Catherians had never lost a war in their 3,000-year history. But they had never faced anything like the Vraktar. The enemy didn't follow normal military logic. They attacked in massive swarms that ignored casualties. Their technology adapted to whatever weapons were used against them. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to learn from each battle, becoming more efficient with every encounter. "What worked against them once never worked again. Status of our remaining forces?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. Crix consulted his reports. Approximately 12,000 troops spread across the remaining defensive positions. Most units are down to 30% strength. Ammunition is running low and medical supplies are nearly exhausted. The Skyreachers have lost most of their aircraft and many of the survivors are too injured to fly. 12,000 troops to defend an entire planet. The numbers were impossible. Even if every remaining soldier was a perfect warrior, they couldn't cover enough ground to stop the Vraktar advance. An explosion much closer than the others shook the bunker, causing several officers to stumble. Emergency lights flickered as dust fell from the ceiling. "They've reached the inner perimeter," announced Sensor Operator Quill, his beak clicking nervously. The Skyreacher's feathers were ruffled with stress. Estimated enemy strength is over 100,000 and growing. They're setting up artillery positions on the hills surrounding the city. Zeloth stared at the tactical display as more red markers appeared. The Vraktar were methodical in their approach to the final assault. They would surround the capital completely, then bombard it until nothing remained alive. It was the same pattern they had followed on every other world. "Ma'am," Vilex called from his communication station. "We're receiving surrender demands from the Vraktar command ship." "Put it through," she ordered, though she already knew she would refuse. The main screen flickered to life, showing the interior of a Vraktar vessel. The alien that appeared looked like all the others, insectoid features with multifaceted eyes and mandibles that clicked when it spoke. Its voice came through the translator as a harsh mechanical buzz. "Coalition forces, you will surrender immediately. Your resistance serves no purpose. Your weapons cannot harm us. Your tactics have failed. Submit and your deaths will be swift." Zeloth stepped forward. "This is Commander Zeloth of the Kytherian Defense Coalition. We do not surrender. We will fight until the last of us falls." The Vraktar's head tilted slightly. "Your species shows admirable determination. It will make your biomass more valuable. You have 1 hour to reconsider. After that, we begin the final assault." The transmission ended, leaving the bunker in tense silence. "Orders, ma'am?" asked Thalo quietly. Zeloth looked around at her officers one last time. These brave beings from across the galaxy had followed her into an impossible situation. They deserved better than this. They all deserved better. "Send one final transmission on all emergency frequencies," she ordered. "Full spectrum broadcast, maximum power. Maybe someone out there will hear it and learn from our mistakes." As Vilex began working on the transmission, Zeloth composed her thoughts. What could she say that might help future civilizations avoid their fate? What warning could she give about an enemy that seemed invincible? "Recording ready, ma'am," Vilex announced. Zeloth took a deep breath and began. "This is Commander Zeloth of the Kytherian Defense Coalition broadcasting on all frequencies. We are the last survivors of a 19-species alliance. Our worlds have fallen to an enemy known as the Vraktar. They cannot be reasoned with. They cannot be stopped by conventional means. If anyone receives this message, do not try to fight them as we did. Find another way. Learn from our failure. Remember us and do better." She paused, then added quietly, "This is our final transmission. May the stars watch over whoever comes after us." The message broadcasted into the void as explosions grew closer overhead. Commander Zeloth prepared her people for their last stand, unaware that somewhere in the darkness between stars, ancient sensors were already detecting their desperate plea. 3 hours after Commander Zeloth's final transmission, the Vraktar began their assault on the capital city, the night sky filled with streaking energy blasts and the thunder of explosions. In the command bunker, the remaining coalition officers watched their defensive positions fall one by one on the tactical display. "Sector 4 has gone silent," reported Crix, his crystalline body now barely glowing with exhaustion. "That leaves us with defensive positions in only 3 sectors." Zeloth nodded grimly. The end was coming faster than she had expected. The Vraktar had learned from their previous battles and were hitting the coalition's weak points with surgical precision. Soon there would be nowhere left to retreat. "Ma'am," called out Sensor Operator Quill from his station, his feathers ruffled with confusion. "I'm detecting some unusual energy readings at the edge of the system." "Probably more Vraktar reinforcements," Thalo said wearily. The Tidal Folk captain had lost most of her unit in the fighting and looked ready to collapse. But Quill's head feathers stood up straight, a sign of extreme alertness in his species. "No, ma'am, these readings are different. The energy signatures don't match anything in our databases, and the approach vectors are all wrong for Vraktar vessels." Zeloth looked up from the tactical display. "What do you mean, wrong?" "Well," Quill consulted his instruments carefully. "The Vraktar always approach from multiple directions in swarm formations. These contacts are moving in a straight line formation, 3 vessels only, and their engine signatures—" He paused, checking his readings again. "I've never seen anything like them." Communications Officer Vilex suddenly straightened at his station. "Ma'am, I'm picking up transmissions from those ships. but the language and transmission methods don't match any known species in the Galactic database. Could it be a new Vraktar variant? Asked Crix, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it himself. Negative, Quill replied, his voice growing excited. These ships are approaching the Vraktar fleet directly. If they were allied, they would join the formation, not fly straight at them. For the first time in months, Zeleth felt a spark of hope. Put the long-range sensors on the main display. I want to see these ships. The holographic display shifted to show the outer system. 3 vessels appeared as blue dots moving steadily toward the massive red cloud that represented the Vraktar fleet. The unknown ships were tiny compared to the enemy armada, but they showed no sign of changing course or slowing down. Magnify if possible, Zeleth ordered. The display zoomed in, revealing the ships in more detail. They were unlike anything in the Coalition database. Sleek and angular, they seemed to be built from some kind of dark metal that absorbed sensor readings. No external weapons were visible, but the hulls showed signs of advanced technology that the Coalition's sensors couldn't fully analyze. Those designs, whispered Lieutenant Crix, his crystal body beginning to glow brighter. I've seen something like them before in the ancient archives. What are you talking about? Zeleth asked. Crix moved to a secondary console and began pulling up old data files. When I was studying at the Crystal Universities, we had to research the old legends and myths of known space. There were stories about a species that vanished centuries ago. Most scholars thought they were just tales, but the ship descriptions... He highlighted several ancient text fragments on his screen. The texts were in various languages, but the translation software rendered them in standard Galactic. One passage caught Zeleth's attention. The ghost ships appeared without warning, their hulls dark as space itself. No one knew where they came from, but wherever they went, impossible victories followed. Ghost ships? Thalo asked skeptically. You think these are some kind of supernatural vessels? Not supernatural, Crix explained excitedly, but ships belonging to a species called humans in the old texts. According to the legends, they were master engineers and fighters who could win battles that no one else could win. But they disappeared from known space over 300 years ago. Most historians believe they never existed at all. Captain Violet suddenly looked up from his communications array. Ma'am, the unknown vessels are hailing us directly. The signal is cutting through Vraktar, jamming like it isn't even there. Put it through, Zeleth ordered. Her heart racing. The main screen flickered, then displayed the interior of an unknown ship's bridge. The lighting was dim, and most of the equipment was unfamiliar, but the figure standing in the center made everyone in the bunker gasp. It was clearly a sentient being, but unlike any species they had ever seen. Bipedal like many galactic races, but with smooth skin instead of scales, feathers, or crystal formations. Its face had 2 forward-facing eyes and features that seemed both alien and strangely familiar. Most striking was its clothing, some kind of dark uniform with symbols and markings that looked both practical and ceremonial. Coalition forces, the being said, and its voice was deep and steady. The translation came through clearly despite the unfamiliar language. This is Colonel Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your distress signal. What is your tactical situation? Zeleth stepped forward, hardly believing what she was seeing. This is Commander Zeleth. You're human? A slight smile crossed the being's face. That's right. I know we're not supposed to exist anymore, but we've been keeping a low profile for the past few centuries. Your message reached one of our deep space monitoring stations. We don't usually get involved in galactic conflicts, but your situation sounded familiar. Familiar? Zeleth asked. We've dealt with the Vraktar before, Colonel Chen explained. About 200 years ago, they tried to expand into our territory. We convinced them to look elsewhere for their conquests. On the tactical display, Zeleth could see the 3 human ships approaching the massive Vraktar fleet. The size difference was absurd. Each Vraktar vessel was easily 10 times larger than the human ships. Colonel, she said urgently, you don't understand. We've been fighting them for 2 years. Our combined fleets couldn't stop them. They have over 500 ships in orbit and more than 100,000 troops on the ground. You only have 3 vessels. I appreciate the warning, Commander, Chen replied calmly. But 3 ships should be more than enough for this situation. We're not planning to fight them in a traditional sense. Before Zeleth could ask what that meant, alarms began sounding throughout the bunker. Sensor operator Quill looked up from his instruments with amazement. Ma'am, the Vraktar fleet is changing course. They're pulling back from their bombardment positions and moving to intercept the human ships. What? Zelath looked at the tactical display in confusion. Why would they do that? They were minutes away from completing their assault. Because, Colonel Chen's voice continued from the communications channel, the Vraktar remember us. They know that when humans show up, their easy victories tend to become complicated problems. They're trying to eliminate the threat before we can do anything. Unpredictable. Zelath watched in fascination as the entire Vraktar fleet, hundreds of massive warships, began turning away from the planet to face three much smaller human vessels. It was like watching an entire army stop attacking a fortress to chase three individual soldiers. Colonel, she said, what exactly did you do to them 200 years ago? Chen's smile became wider. We introduced them to human military philosophy. They didn't like it very much. Excuse me for a moment, Commander. We're about to enter engagement range and I need to coordinate with my other ships. The transmission switched to an external view showing the three human ships from Zelath's sensors. They were still moving in perfect formation toward the Vraktar fleet, showing no signs of fear or hesitation despite being outnumbered over 100 to 1. This is impossible, Thalo whispered. No one stands and fights the Vraktar in open space. The smart thing to do is run. Crix's crystal body was now glowing brightly with excitement. But that's exactly what the legends said about humans. They don't do the smart thing. They do the impossible thing. As they watched, the leading human ship began broadcasting something on all frequencies. Vilex quickly translated the signal and ancient words appeared on their screens. Attention Vraktar fleet, this is Terran vessel Defiance. You are in violation of the Chen Doctrine established in 2387. Withdraw from this system immediately, or face the consequences. You have been warned. The response from the Vraktar came immediately. A massive barrage of energy weapons from dozens of ships, enough firepower to level a small moon. But something impossible happened. The three human ships didn't try to dodge or run. Instead, they seemed to simply disappear for a moment, then reappear in completely different positions, completely unharmed. What was that? Zelath demanded. Quill checked his sensors frantically. I don't know, ma'am. For approximately 2.7 seconds, all three ships vanished from our sensors completely. Then they reappeared in new positions, but according to physics, they shouldn't have been able to move that fast. Colonel Chen's voice came back on the communication channel, and now there was definitely amusement in her tone. Sorry about that, Commander. We needed to demonstrate something to the Vraktar. Now let's see if they remember their manners. The massive alien fleet had stopped firing and was pulling back into a defensive formation. Even from this distance, it was clear the Vraktar bombardment had stopped. For the first time in 3 months, the command bunker was quiet except for the hum of electronic equipment and the distant rumble of ground battles. Commander Zelath stared at the tactical display, watching 3 tiny human ships face down a fleet that had destroyed 17 worlds. Ma'am, called sensor operator Quill, his voice filled with disbelief. The human ships are launching something, small craft, dozens of them, heading straight for the planet's surface. Drop pods. Colonel Chen's voice explained through the communication channel. We don't waste time with traditional landing procedures when people are dying. My teams are heading directly to your most contested battle zones. Zelath felt her heart race. Colonel, you can't drop troops into active combat zones without proper reconnaissance or coordination with our ground forces. The Vraktar will tear them apart before they even land. Commander, Chen replied with calm confidence. Human soldiers don't require traditional support structures. We prefer to evaluate situations firsthand and adapt accordingly. Trust me, we've done this before. On the sensor display, the drop pods streaked through the atmosphere like meteors, their heat signatures burning bright against the night sky. But instead of following safe landing vectors to secured areas, they were heading directly into the heaviest fighting zones where coalition forces were barely holding their positions. This is suicide, whispered Captain Thalo, her webbed hands gripping the edge of the control panel. No one drops directly into a Vraktar-controlled area and survives. Lieutenant Crix, however, was studying his historical archives again. Actually, according to the old legends, this is exactly how humans fought. They would appear in the middle of battles that seemed lost and somehow turn them around. The first drop pod impacts showed on the tactical display as small explosions in Sector 2, where the 47th Mixed Regiment had been cut off and surrounded for 6 hours. Zelath had written them off as lost, unable to send reinforcements through the Vraktar lines. "Communications to Sector 2, she ordered. "Find out what's happening to those human soldiers." Vilex worked his controls frantically. "Ma'am, I'm getting reports from Captain Rex's unit. He says the humans are advancing on the Vraktar positions." Advancing? Zeleth couldn't believe what she was hearing. "How many humans landed in that sector?" According to the drop pod count, 12. 12 soldiers against an estimated 3,000 Vraktar warriors. Zeleth looked at the tactical display again, expecting to see the human positions being overrun within minutes. Instead, something impossible was happening. The Vraktar formations in Sector 2 were falling back. "Get me a direct line to Captain Rex," she demanded. The communication screen flickered to life, showing the interior of a damaged bunker. Captain Rex, a scarred veteran Catherians with one arm in a sling, appeared on screen. Behind him, the sound of weapons fire was constant, but it was different from the usual desperate defensive shooting they had been hearing for months. "Commander," Rex said, his voice filled with amazement. "You need to see this. The humans. They're not fighting like anyone else." "What do you mean?" Zeleth asked. "They landed right in the middle of the Vraktar advance," Rex explained. "But instead of taking defensive positions, they immediately went on the attack. But it's not just attacking, they're using our weapons, Vraktar weapons, pieces of destroyed equipment, even chunks of rubble. And somehow everything they touch becomes dangerous." The camera view shifted to show the battlefield outside the bunker. Zeleth could see figures in dark-powered armor moving through the combat zone with fluid precision. They were definitely humanoid, but their movements seemed too fast and too coordinated for normal biology. One of the armored figures appeared briefly in the camera view, carrying what looked like a Coalition energy rifle that had been modified with Vraktar technology and pieces of crystalline equipment that probably came from destroyed Vorthak units. The weapon shouldn't have been able to function, but energy blasts from it were cutting through Vraktar armor like it was paper. "How are they doing that?" Lieutenant Crix asked, his crystal body glowing brighter with excitement. "Patch me through to the human unit in Sector 2, Zeleth ordered. "Human unit. This is Coalition Command," Vilex transmitted. A voice came back immediately, clear and professional despite the sound of intense combat in the background. "Coalition Command, this is Sergeant Martinez, 3rd Assault Team. We're currently engaged in pest control operations." "What do you need?" "Pest control?" Zeleth thought. "They're calling the Vraktar pests?" "Sergeant," she said, "this is Commander Zeleth. Your situation looks extremely dangerous. Do you require assistance?" "Negative, ma'am," Martinez replied, and there was definitely amusement in his voice. "Situation is well in hand. These bugs aren't much different from the ones we dealt with in the Proxima campaign. Give us another 20 minutes and Sector 2 will be clear." 20 minutes to clear a sector that 3 full Coalition regiments couldn't hold for 3 months? "Sergeant, you should know that the Vraktar adapt to whatever tactics are used against them. What works once won't work again." "Understood, ma'am," Martinez responded. "That's why we don't use the same tactic twice. Human military doctrine is based on constant adaptation and improvisation. These bugs might learn fast, but we learn faster." More drop pods were landing across the battlefield. Zeleth watched the tactical display as human forces deployed in impossible locations. On top of Vraktar command posts, in the middle of enemy supply lines, even inside the heavily fortified positions that Coalition forces had been unable to approach for weeks. "Ma'am," reported Quill, "I'm reading some kind of interference from the human positions. Their equipment is doing something to our sensors." "What kind of interference?" "It's like they're improvising their own technology in real time. I'm detecting energy signatures that shouldn't be possible, weapon systems that combine multiple technologies, and communication methods that seem to bypass normal electromagnetic protocols." Captain Thallo looked up from her own instruments. "Commander, I'm getting reports from other sectors. Wherever the humans land, our trapped units are breaking out of their defensive positions and going on the offensive." "How is that possible?" Zeleth asked. The answer came from Colonel Chen's voice over the main communication channel. "Commander, would you like to meet face-to-face? I'm in a drop pod heading for your position right now. You're coming here, but the command bunker is surrounded by Vraktar forces." "Not anymore," Chen replied casually. "My advance team cleared the area about 10 minutes ago. Landing in 30 seconds. Zeleth looked at the tactical display around the command bunker. The red markers indicating Vraktar positions had indeed disappeared. replaced by green markers showing friendly forces. How had human soldiers cleared heavily fortified enemy positions without anyone in the command bunker even noticing? An explosion much different from the usual bombardment shook the bunker. This one was controlled precise. Emergency lights activated as the main blast doors opened, something that should have been impossible since they were sealed from the inside. "Sorry about the dramatic entrance," came a voice from the corridor, "but we needed to make sure the route was secure." A figure appeared in the doorway wearing advanced powered armor that looked like it had been assembled from a dozen different technologies. The helmet retracted, revealing the face Zeloth had seen on the communication screen. Colonel Chen looked exactly like a being from the old legends. Smooth skin, forward-facing eyes, and an expression that somehow conveyed both friendliness and absolute confidence. "Commander Zeloth," Chen said, extending her hand in what Zeloth recognized as a greeting gesture from the historical archives. "It's an honor to meet you. Your people fought bravely against impossible odds. That takes real courage." Zeloth hesitantly extended her own clawed hand and found Chen's grip firm but not aggressive. "Colonel, how did you get past the Vraktar defenses?" "We didn't go past them," Chen explained, removing her armor's gauntlets to reveal hands that were clearly adapted for tool use. "We went through them. Humans have a saying, if you can't go around a problem, go through it. If you can't go through it, go over it. If you can't go over it, dig under it. If all else fails, convince the problem it wants to move somewhere else." Lieutenant Crick stepped forward, his crystal body now glowing brilliantly. "Colonel, according to our historical records, humans disappeared from known space over 300 years ago. Where have you been?" Chen smiled, and there was something in that expression that reminded Zeloth of the old legends about beings who found joy in impossible challenges. "We've been around, Lieutenant. We just decided the galaxy was getting too crowded and too comfortable. Human civilization does its best work when we have room to experiment and grow without worrying about galactic politics." "But why come back now?" asked Captain Thalo. "Because," Chen said, looking around at the diverse group of coalition officers, "we heard something in your distress call that we recognized. Courage, determination, the refusal to give up even when everything looks hopeless. Those are human virtues, but they're not exclusively." Colonel Chen spread a holographic map across the command bunker's central table. But it wasn't like any tactical display the coalition officers had ever seen. Instead of showing fixed positions and standard military formations, it showed flowing patterns of movement, resource flows, and what looked like psychological pressure points. "The thing about the Vraktar," Chen explained, pointing to areas where the enemy was massing, "is that they're excellent at traditional warfare. They adapt to whatever tactics you use, they learn from each engagement, and they have overwhelming numbers. If you fight them the way they expect to be fought, you'll lose." Commander Zeloth studied the display, trying to understand the human approach. "But what other way is there to fight? We've tried every tactical variation our combined species could develop." "You've tried every reasonable tactical variation," corrected Sergeant Martinez, who had just arrived from Sector 2 with his armor covered in what looked like improvised modifications. "Humans specialize in unreasonable tactics." Lieutenant Crix leaned forward, his crystal body pulsing with curiosity. "What do you mean by unreasonable?" Chen smiled and touched a control on her armor. Suddenly, the bunker filled with the sound of human voices talking rapidly in their own language. But something was strange about the communications. They were layered with music, random sounds, and what sounded like jokes mixed in with tactical information. "What are we listening to?" asked Captain Thalo. "Human military communications during the current operation," Chen explained. "We don't use standard tactical protocols because the Vraktar can learn to predict them. Instead, we embed our real orders inside conversations about food, games, stories, and random thoughts. The actual tactics are hidden in the cultural context that the Vraktar can't understand." Vilex looked up from his communication station, his 4 arms moving frantically. "I'm trying to decode the tactical information, but the translation software can't separate the military data from the—" "Is that a recipe for something called pizza?" "Probably," Martinez laughed. "Johnson always gets hungry during combat operations. But you'll notice the Vraktar have stopped intercepting our communications effectively. They can translate the words, but they can't translate the culture." Chen manipulated the holographic display, showing the current battle situation. "This is just the beginning. Humans don't just adapt our tactics. We adapt our entire approach to warfare. Watch what we're doing in Sector 5. The display zoomed in on an area where human forces were engaging a large Vraktar formation. But instead of fighting them directly, the humans seemed to be building something. Are they constructing fortifications in the middle of combat? Zelath asked in disbelief. Not fortifications, Chen grinned. They're building a giant musical instrument. A what? Martinez brought up a secondary display showing the construction from ground level. Human soldiers were using salvaged metal, destroyed vehicles, and even pieces of Vraktar equipment to build what looked like an enormous musical device spanning several city blocks. You see, Chen explained, we discovered that Vraktar communication depends on very specific frequency ranges. Their entire coordination system is based on subsonic vibrations that their hive mind uses to maintain unit cohesion. So you're jamming their communications? Asked Crix. Better than that, Martinez said with obvious pride. We're playing them music. Specifically, we're playing them human jazz fusion from the 23rd century. The improvisation patterns and frequency modulations completely confuse their coordination protocols. On the display, they could see the effect. The Vraktar formation in Sector 5 was moving in increasingly erratic patterns. Individual units breaking off from the main group and wandering in circles. This is impossible, whispered Thalo. You're winning a battle with music? Music is just one tool, Chen explained. The key to fighting the Vraktar is to attack them with things they can't adapt to, because they can't understand them. Human creativity, humor, art, and pure stubborn refusal to accept logical limitations. Another human soldier entered the bunker, carrying what looked like a Vraktar weapon that had been extensively modified. Ma'am? The Cultural Warfare Division reports success in Sector 7. They've convinced approximately 2,000 Vraktar that they're supposed to be building sculptures instead of fighting. Sculptures? Zelath couldn't believe what she was hearing. One of our anthropologists figured out that Vraktar society doesn't have concepts for abstract art, the soldier explained. So when we introduced them to the idea of creative expression through sculpture, their adaptation protocols couldn't process it. They're now trying to adapt by becoming artists instead of warriors. Chen pulled up another section of the display. Meanwhile, in Sector 3, we're teaching the local coalition forces some basic human military principles. Want to see how that's working out? The view switched to show Captain Rex's unit, but they weren't the same demoralized soldiers from earlier. They were moving with purpose and confidence, using tactics that seemed to make no sense but were clearly effective. Rex to command, came the captain's voice over the communication channel, and his tone was excited rather than desperate. The humans taught us something called aggressive improvisation. We just convinced a Vraktar command unit that their weapons were malfunctioning by throwing rocks at them in a specific pattern. Rocks? Zelath asked. Psychological warfare, Chen explained. If you throw rocks at an enemy that relies on technological superiority, they assume their technology must be failing to allow primitive weapons to be effective. The Vraktar spent 20 minutes running diagnostics on perfectly functional equipment instead of fighting. Lieutenant Crix was practically glowing with excitement. This is incredible. You're fighting them with psychology, culture, and creative thinking instead of just superior firepower. Exactly, Chen nodded. Human military doctrine is based on the principle that any problem can be solved if you're willing to think about it differently enough. We call it tactical flexibility beyond the bounds of logic. Martinez brought up a display showing human soldiers working alongside coalition forces throughout the battlefield. The best part is teaching your people how to think like humans. It's not about changing their nature, it's about showing them they have options they never considered. On the screen, they could see Skyreacher pilots who had been grounded by lack of aircraft now using their flight abilities, in combination with human portable technology, to become living guided missiles. Fourth-hack engineers were combining their crystal energy storage with human improvisation techniques to create weapons that shouldn't exist. Tidalfolk amphibious specialists were working with human underwater combat experts to attack Vraktar positions from completely unexpected directions. Your people are natural warriors, Chen observed, watching the tactical display. They just needed someone to show them that warfare doesn't have to follow the rules the enemy expects. A communication came in from the human fleet in orbit. Colonel, the Vraktar fleet is requesting negotiations. Chen raised an eyebrow. Already? That's faster than usual. What are they offering? Complete withdrawal from the system in exchange for, and I quote, no more of the disturbing human activities. The command bunker fell silent. After 2 years of relentless advance and the destruction of 17 worlds, the Vraktar were offering to leave because they found human tactics disturbing. Are you going to accept? Zeloth asked. Chen considered for a moment. That depends. Commander, what do you and your people want? We can negotiate their withdrawal, or we can teach you enough human military philosophy that you'll never have to worry about them again. Zeloth looked around at her officers. Crix was practically vibrating with enthusiasm. Thalo looked amazed but determined. Even Vilek seemed energized by the possibility of learning these impossible human techniques. Colonel, she said slowly, I think we'd like to learn. If humans can turn desperate last stands into victory through creative thinking and refusal to accept limitations, then that's something the Coalition needs to understand. Excellent, Chen smiled. Fair warning, though. Learning to fight like humans can be addictive. Once you start solving impossible problems with ridiculous solutions, it's hard to go back to conventional thinking. Martinez laughed. Ma'am, I think they're ready for that. Did you see what Captain Rex's unit just accomplished? They figured out how to use Vraktar pheromone communication against them by cooking human food with the right spices. The enemy thinks they're receiving orders to retreat. Cooking? Zeloth asked. Human cuisine is chemically complex, Chen explained with obvious pride. In the right concentrations, our food can mimic communication chemicals from dozens of species. It's one of the reasons we're such good diplomats. We can literally speak other species' chemical languages through cooking. On the tactical display, more green markers were appearing as coalition forces went on the offensive, using human-inspired tactics. The tide wasn't just turning, it was becoming a rout. The Vraktar, faced with enemies who fought with music, art, cooking, and pure creative chaos, were retreating across the entire front. Colonel, Zeloth said, how do we learn to think like this? First lesson, Chen replied, is to stop thinking of problems as having only one solution. Humans always assume there are at least 7 different ways to approach any dawn broke over Nexus Prime for the first time in 3 months without the sound of Vraktar bombardment. Instead, the air filled with something the Coalition forces had almost forgotten. The organized noise of a successful military operation. Commander Zeloth stood on the observation deck of the command bunker, watching human and Coalition forces working together to mop up the last pockets of enemy resistance. Final sector reports coming in, announced Lieutenant Crix, his crystal body glowing with excitement and exhaustion. Sector 12 clear. Sector 15 clear. The last Vraktar ground forces are in full retreat to their evacuation points. Colonel Chen joined Zeloth at the observation window, her human features showing satisfaction, but not surprise. Your people learned faster than any species we've worked with before. I think you have a natural talent for creative problem solving. Through the window, they could see the results of 12 hours of human-inspired warfare. What had been an impossible military situation was now a coordinated victory that defied everything the Coalition had thought they knew about combat. The key hadn't been superior firepower or better technology. It had been learning to think about problems in ways the enemy couldn't predict or counter. How are our combined casualty rates? Zeloth asked, though she was almost afraid to hear the answer. Remarkably low, reported Captain Thalo from her station. Once our forces started using human tactical philosophy, we stopped taking the heavy losses we'd been suffering for months. When you don't fight the enemy on their terms, they can't use their advantages effectively. Sergeant Martinez entered the command bunker, carrying what looked like a Vraktar communication device that had been completely rebuilt, with Coalition and human technology combined. Ma'am, you need to hear this. We've been monitoring Vraktar command communications and they're having some interesting conversations. He activated the device, and the bunker filled with the translated voices of Vraktar commanders. The usual confident, methodical tone was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like panic. Command, the enemy forces are using tactics that violate standard military logic, came one voice. They attacked our supply depot with what appeared to be a musical performance that somehow disabled our equipment. Confirmed, replied another voice. Unit 47 reports that hostile forces defeated their position using cooking techniques and interpretive dance. Our adaptation protocols cannot process this data. All units, came a third voice that carried the authority of high command. We are implementing emergency withdrawal procedures. These opponents utilize warfare methods that our species cannot comprehend or counter. Retreat to orbital positions and prepare for system evacuation. Martinez turned off the device with a satisfied expression. They're not just retreating, they're completely confused. The Vraktar adapt to logical military strategies, but human-inspired creative chaos is outside their ability to process. What about their fleet in orbit? Asked Zeleth. Colonel Chen checked her wrist communicator. My ships are having a very interesting conversation with their command vessel. It turns out the Vraktar remember our previous encounter quite clearly, and they're not eager for a repeat performance. The main communication screen activated, showing the bridge of Chen's ship. A human officer appeared on screen, her expression professional but amused. Colonel, the officer reported, the Vraktar fleet commander is requesting immediate negotiations. They're offering complete withdrawal from the system and a formal agreement to avoid this region of space permanently. What are they asking for in return? Chen inquired. Nothing, ma'am. They just want assurance that humans will not pursue them or teach our methods to other species in the galaxy. Zeleth looked at Chen in amazement. They're afraid you'll teach others to fight like humans? It makes sense from their perspective, Chen explained. The Vraktar are successful because they can predict and adapt to conventional military thinking. If human tactical philosophy spreads to other species, their entire expansion strategy becomes worthless. Lieutenant Crix stepped forward, his crystal body pulsing with an idea. Colonel, what if we don't just accept their withdrawal? What if we turn this into a teaching opportunity for the entire galaxy? What do you mean? Zeleth asked. The coalition represents over 100 species, Crix explained excitedly. If we can learn human military philosophy and teach it to our member worlds, no one would ever have to face what we went through here. Chen considered this proposal carefully. That's actually not a bad idea. Human civilization has always believed that knowledge should be shared, especially knowledge that helps people defend themselves. Sergeant Martinez brought up a tactical display showing the current situation across the battlefield. Ma'am, if you look at what we've accomplished here, it's not just military victory. We've created something new, true tactical integration between species with completely different capabilities. The display showed remarkable examples of interspecies cooperation. Skyreachers were using their natural flight abilities combined with human portable technology to provide reconnaissance and rapid response capabilities that neither species could achieve alone. Vorthak crystal technology was being combined with human engineering principles to create energy systems that were more efficient than anything either species had developed independently. Look at Sector 8. Martinez pointed to a specific area. The Tidalfolk amphibious teams worked with our underwater specialists to develop completely new methods of aquatic warfare. They're not just using human techniques, they're improving on them by adding their own natural abilities. Captain Thallow looked up from her communications console. I'm getting reports from all sectors that our mixed species units are requesting permission to continue working together, even after the crisis is over. The cooperation is working so well that no one wants to go back to separate command structures. Chen smiled broadly. That's the most human thing I've heard all day. Nothing makes us happier than seeing people work together to accomplish things none of them could do alone. Colonel, Zeleth said slowly, the coalition has member species spread across dozens of systems. If we could establish a formal partnership with humanity, sharing military philosophy and defensive techniques, you're talking about a mutual defense and education agreement, Chen mused. Interesting. We haven't been formally involved in galactic politics for centuries, but this situation is different. The communication screen activated again, showing the human fleet commander. Colonel, the Vraktar are getting impatient. They want a response to their withdrawal offer. Tell them, Chen decided, that we accept their withdrawal, but with conditions. First, they provide full information about any other species they've attacked so we can offer assistance. Second, they agree to a formal non-aggression pact with any species that wants human defensive training. Third, they acknowledge that this region of space is now under joint human coalition protection. And if they refuse? Asked the fleet commander. Chen's expression became distinctly predatory. Then we demonstrate some of the human military techniques we haven't used yet. I'm sure they remember what happened when they insisted on fighting us 200 years ago. Within an hour, the Vraktar had accepted all conditions and begun their withdrawal from the system. Their massive fleet, which had seemed invincible just days before, departed without firing another shot. Standing on the observation deck, watching the last enemy ships disappear into hyperspace, Zeleth reflected on what had changed. The coalition forces hadn't become stronger in any traditional sense. They had learned to think differently about what strength meant. "Colonel," she said, "I need to ask you something. Why did humans disappear from galactic civilization? With capabilities like yours, you could have dominated known space centuries ago." Chen leaned against the window, looking out at the mixed groups of human and coalition soldiers working together to secure the city. "Because domination was never the point, Commander. Humans are explorers and problem solvers. We disappeared because the galaxy was becoming too organized, too predictable. We needed space to grow and experiment without constantly worrying about galactic politics. And now we've discovered something interesting," Chen replied. "Working with other species doesn't limit human creativity. It enhances it. Your people bring perspectives and abilities that help us think of solutions we never would have found alone." Sergeant Martinez approached with a final report. "Ma'am, casualty count is final. Total coalition losses during the human-assisted operations. 47 wounded, 0 killed. Vraktar losses, approximately 80% of their ground forces and complete tactical defeat of their fleet. 47 wounded? Zeleth couldn't believe it. In 12 hours of intensive combat? That's the thing about fighting smart instead of fighting hard," Martinez explained. "When you don't do what the enemy expects, they can't hurt you effectively." Colonel Chen activated her communicator. "Fleet Command, begin preparations for establishing a permanent presence in this system. We're going to be working with the Coalition on a long-term basis." "Ma'am," came the reply. "Should we contact Earth and request additional resources?" "Negative," Chen replied.